Hillary has been lengthening her excuses as to why she lost the election. She didn't really lose the election. It was stolen from her by, I think it's up to 24 different excuses she has now. Number 24 is content farms in Macedonia. And as I said, my grandfather was a Macedonian content farmer, and we often think about, gathering on the porch and recalling the old days on the Macedonian. He never thought that the old content farmers he left behind in Macedonia would one day steal the U.S. presidential election. They are gnarled, hard-working Macedonian peasants, and the way they were able to reach
It is now September. Folks are back from vacation, the kids are off to school, and October is next month. However, and according to media reports, quote, Finland's foreign minister said on Friday his EU colleagues were increasingly hopeful they could eventually move towards membership talks with North Macedonia and Albania, though he gave no timeline, unquote. Meaning, will Macedonia get a date for the opening of EU accession talks next month with the ongoing Boki 13 Katica Janeva Zoran Zaev scandal continuing to unfold? Will the Star of Kutlesh make a comeback among Macedonians even as the government of Zoran Zaev continues to ban it? The answer to that question is a bold hell yeah, as citizens, fed up with Zaev and his government ministers telling them what history they can claim and celebrate and what history they cannot, are using the Star of Kutlesh more often and in more public settings. And that is appropriate because we are rapidly coming up on September 8, Macedonia's Independence Day. As Nikola Dimitrov said in 2002 when he was the Macedonian ambassador to the United States of America, quote, matters of history are for historians to answer. They cannot be answered by political resolution or declaration, unquote. Apparently, and now that he is the foreign minister, he no longer believes that. Of course, the only thing Nikola Dimitrov believes in is the advancement of Nikola Dimitrov. We'll discuss all of this and more in this episode of the Macedonian Content Farmers Podcast. I'm Jason Miko, coming to you from the foot of the Catalina Mountains in Oro Valley, Arizona.
And this is Cvetin Suleimanov calling in from Skopje, Macedonia.
How you doing?
Yeah, great. Coming from the most interesting country in the world, I'm doing very, very good.
Yes, well, there's
no lack of entertainment here.
Yeah, I know. Well, my goodness, we got a whole lot to discuss. Yeah, now last week, of course, we did a kind of a catch-up podcast. You had been traveling and whatnot, and so it was kind of a rehash of things that had gone on through early mid-August. Now here we are, the beginning of September. I should mention that we're recording this. This is episode number 39. We are recording this on Sunday, September 1. I said in the monologue the kids are back to school. Obviously, this is going to drop tomorrow, Monday, September 2. The kids will be back in school in Macedonia. Here in the United States, it's a holiday, Labor Day, so the kids will be back in school on Tuesday, although so many of them are already back in school. But we've got a lot to talk about in this podcast, from the Boki 13 scandal to what I mentioned, the Star of Kutlesh. I saw Nikola Dimitrov was with the Greek foreign minister. Alexander Soros was in Macedonia. Big Mike was in Macedonia. Matthew Palmer was not in Macedonia, but he's the new Department of State Special Representative for the Western Balkans. Blah, blah, blah. Let's start with Boki 13. What's the latest?
He's still in prison. Still hasn't been interrogated.
No?
Nope. Not much new coming, particularly on his end of the scandal. There was just some report that there was a curious movement of government ministers, of all sorts of government officials, diplomats, to his house after he was arrested. So while he was in prison, apparently coming to meet with the family, assure them, or maybe go through his archives and his, basement vault or something. There is some priest living next door who Boki attacked, his father and Boki. Both of them attacked him, I think like a year ago, over a stupid parking issue, and even, injured him badly and avoided any police scrutiny. I think they broke his ribs or his leg or something.
Oh my goodness.
And now this guy is obviously feeding information to the public who was visiting Boki's house. Like he came out with this story that there was a whole line of revolving door of government ministers and officials coming in and out of his house shortly after the arrest.
Wow. And okay, so now we know that he's in prison. Katica Janeva is theoretically or supposedly in prison, although I hear now that there's some questions as to whether or not she's actually there or not. Is she?
We're not sure. I mean, some guys on the right were even jokingly offering to the prisoners, offering them money if they could snap a picture of her, which was rampant, happened all the time with Boki, with other high-profile people who were arrested. I mean, these Kumanova terrorists, they're practically holding Facebook Live events from prison, so it's not like difficult to snap a picture of a prisoner, but there is nothing on Katica, which rumored speculations that she might be held actually outside of the prison, just hidden from public view, but not actually detained. The warden of the prison was at pains to insist that she is in prison, but it was difficult to find a room for her, so don't ask me where she actually is kept. And famously, the warden is Isa Drahic, an SDSM official whose brother was being arrested on drug smuggling charges in the past, and Isad's daughter, she works for Katica Janeva, so he's basically putting away the person who hired his daughter on a well-paid, well-remunerated job in the special prosecutor's office. So she's obviously getting the most favorable treatment imaginable, given this and also given everything she knows about Zaev. But yeah, we're not sure if she's in prison.
Wow. Well, the whole prison arrangement stuff almost sounds like slightly a Jeffrey Epstein type of thing. But anyway, we'll leave that aside for right now. So the two main characters in this unfolding and ongoing scandal are in prison. There's still the issue of a new law on the special public prosecutor that has to be passed theoretically before the end of September, and we're now in September. My understanding is the Public Revenue Office is now investigating Boki's charity, his TV station, and much more. Who knows what they're going to come up with. And again, as we've talked about and has been coming out more and more in various media reports, I saw a Deutsche Welle Macedonian service report that basically stated, how could it can't just be these two, plus who was the other guy that is in detention as well? Freaky, Ziki?
Zoki.
Yeah, okay.
Zoran Milevsky.
Yeah, so it can't be just those three to pull off a racket of this size and scope. There's got to be much more. And of course, speaking on Boki and Katica, obviously they don't want to spend the rest of their lives in jail, and they've got a lot of information, a knowledge of who else is involved and whatnot. At some point, they're going to want to sing, I think. Does that make sense?
Well, yeah, but depends on how hard are they being pressured. If Katica is not even in prison, if this tax audit which you mentioned, it's actually, I mean, the lady who runs the tax authority, she was actually pressured on the issue, and she said this defensively. She's not like forward, outgoing in her investigation. The only person who was actually seemed to be forward and outgoing initially was Vilma Ruskovska. At the start, when she arrested Boki, and she was in your face to all sorts of people, telling businesses that you have to come now to me and tell me proactively that Boki was extorting money from you, otherwise you'll be liable for being part of his scheme, etc. But she very quickly petered off. This trailed off very quickly. And now she does not really leave the impression that she was anxious or eager to arrest Katica Janeva. She stopped giving interviews mostly. Otherwise, she was in the news all the time in the first few days. So, yeah, right now there is very little feeling that the government is actively investigating the scandal, which makes sense given the government's involvement in the heart of the scandal. So they might not sing. I mean, they might. The information which is coming out since then is what Orce Kamshev recorded from Boki, and now he is the one who is running the show. He has the information, presumably even the GPS tracking of the bag with the money allegedly leading to the government building. So yeah, this is the information which we expect to drop, but he's the one who's running the show now, but nobody on the part of the government.
Well, yeah, okay, so you bring up some good points, and obviously there's more questions than answers so far. And as I mentioned in the opening monologue, so the EU foreign ministers had I think it was they called it an informal meeting gathering in Helsinki last week. Nikola Dimitrov was there, I believe. Ioannis used Balkan Tactics, Han, of course. But I guess Finland holds the rotating presidency of the EU right now, and so that's why it was hosted in Helsinki. And the foreign minister said, increasingly hopeful, blah blah blah, for the opening of EU accession talks with Macedonia and Albania, though he gave no timeline, quote unquote. And this all relates, of course, to the Boki 13 Katica Janeva Zoran Zaev scandal, because the longer this drags on, and I know the government knows this, the longer this drags on, the more questions there are, the more there's a quote-unquote media drip of information slowly coming out, the worse it is for them if they don't get to the bottom of this, because that just casts a great amount of doubt on the EU countries that are already doubtful about opening up accession talks with Macedonia. Certainly, some have already said no to Albania. That's kind of a separate issue, because Edi Rama is threatening to create Greater Albania if Albania and Macedonia don't get opening accession talks at the same time in October. So, I just don't see it's in the government's interests to let this thing drag on and leave these questions unanswered. But maybe they're just like deer in the headlights. They just don't know what to do. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that's part of it. They're deer in the headlights, but they're also maybe thinking, okay, we did our part by arresting Janeva, so maybe, and you saw all these ministers, they were giving these very positive statements, notably not the ones from the countries which are actually opposed to opening accession talks, such as France and the Netherlands, who have all the ammunition possible to block this, and quite rightfully so. Even if they don't go into the other big realm of political abuse and failing to meet European standards, which is the use of Balkan tactics against the opposition, the mass arrests of opposition officials, that by itself should have torpedoed any request to open accession talks, but everybody's glossing this over, of course, given the involvement of the internationals in the creation of the crisis. And then, but then, these two countries now have another very, in-your-face scandal, which they can rely on if they want to block Macedonia from opening accession talks. And, by any right, they should.
Right. And I think it's fair to mention, although I don't want to get too deep into the weeds on this one, as it relates to Brexit and the move, we didn't talk about it last week because it just happened last week, the move that Prime Minister Boris Johnson took with Parliament. I believe the word is prorogue. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. Proroguing Parliament. Basically, putting an end to the current session. The Queen, so Parliament will be out of session from the middle of September to the middle of October. The Queen's speech will be on October 14th. Bottom line is, all of that is designed to frustrate the Remainers and keep Britain in the UK in the EU. That's going to have some effect in the decision-making process of all these EU countries as they decide whether or not to open up accession talks for Macedonia and Albania next month, October, even though today's only September 1. So. It just doesn't end, does it?
Yeah, I suppose the US is going to push for this for some reason. Even the UK laughably is giving statements that accession talks should begin, which is very amusing. But the US has now apparently appointed this bug-eyed diplomat, Matthew Palmer, to the position he already holds, the head of the Balkan desk in the State Department. But now they're giving him an additional title, like the special envoy for the Balkans. And we'll see. I suppose they're going to try and push the European countries on the issue.
Yes, Matthew Palmer. I like the way you described him. His new title is Special Representative for the Western Balkans. I think it's always useful to point out that Palmer, even though he is a seasoned State Department diplomat, is also a writer of fiction. with such titles to his name as, quote, The Enemy of the Good, The American Mission, The Wolf of Sarajevo, among others. So I've always thought it interesting, just from a ethical standpoint, that he can be a State Department official and diplomat and yet write works of fiction. Of course, what the State Department is trying to do in Macedonia and elsewhere is a work of fiction. But yeah, so anyway, so he's now in his official position. I think he's going to be in Slovenia later this week, and I don't know where else he's going to be. Hopefully, he'll stay away from Macedonia.
We will have to probably do a tremendous act of self-sacrifice soon, and maybe spread out some of his books between the two of us and try to read them. I was actually checking one of these on Amazon, and one of them is about a U.S. diplomat fomenting a colored revolution in Kyrgyzstan.
Seriously?
The country where,
which one?
Funnily enough,
do you remember?
Sorry. God damn it.
That's okay. So that's where our good friend, the former British ambassador to Macedonia, Charles Garrett, is now.
Yeah, Charles Garrett is there now. But he went straight off the bat. He's not. They had active campaigns in Kyrgyzstan to create this SNL spin-off style comedy shows, like the embassies did in Macedonia as well. And I know this because the two Americans who were doing this were hired in Macedonia to do this USAID-funded, U.S. Embassy-funded, mocking news segments. And I checked them out, and it said that before this they worked in Kyrgyzstan. So, the two countries are being weirdly exposed to similar types of destabilizing activities by the same people to some extent. But Garrett, as soon as he arrived, there was this large-style attempt to arrest the former president of Kyrgyzstan. A policeman was killed. The president was shooting at the police.
Oh.
It took them a few days to arrest him. He had his retinue shooting at the police. His security detail. It was a big mess. So we were joking that Charlie is not wasting his time in Kyrgyzstan.
No,
he's going straight to a coup.
And maybe Charlie read Matthew Palmer's book about that, and that's where.
Very likely. We're gonna have to do the same, unfortunately.
Yeah. Well, now that you bring up Matthew Palmer, I wanted to run through a couple of other folks before we get into an issue on the Prespa and the Star of Kutlesh, as I mentioned in the opening monologue. I see that George Soros's son, Alexander Soros, was with Zoran Zaev this past week. I don't know if that was actually in Macedonia or elsewhere.
It seemed that it was in Macedonia, but I don't think they gave details. It
looked
like he came here.
No, they don't. Well, and this is interesting, and this kind of leads in, and obviously we know that Alexander Soros is in Macedonia not to promote the interests of Macedonia, but to promote the interests of his father, George Soros. Sure. I don't think the government put out a press release as they usually do. They're very good. They got a very, look, I give credit where it's due. They've got a very good public relations spin machine, Zoran Zaev. And so, but I don't think he put out anything about meeting with Alexander Soros for obvious reasons. He also didn't put out, the government didn't put out a press release when he met with Big Mike. Big Mike Straumietis, I guess is how you pronounce his last name, who was...
I suppose he's some Greek guy or something.
Which is, yes, I was looking at that name and I was thinking that's either Latvian, Lithuanian, or Greek. I'm not sure which. But Big Mike, who also goes by the name of Marijuana Don, flew into Macedonia last week on his Gulfstream, whatever, and met with Zoran Zaev. The government of Zoran Zaev did not put out a press release, of course, and so the only reason that we know about this is because Big Mike himself likes to use his Instagram and Twitter account to promote himself and his business. And anyway, he flew there to talk about basically turning Macedonia into one big marijuana field. He met with Zaev, he met with the health minister, and I thought it was interesting, Cvetin, that one of the media outlets that we like to talk about and criticize, Balkan Insight, did a story on this. And according to Balkan Insight, quote, "The government just said that its representatives, including the Prime Minister, have working meetings on economic matters on a daily basis, and that they have no obligation to inform the public about them, unquote, which I thought was great for Balkan Insight. So the government has no obligation to inform the public about what's going on in the government. But Big Mike, I think it's worth pointing out. So he flew into Macedonia to talk about turning Macedonia into one giant big cannabis field. But here's something interesting about Big Mike. In his own words, Big Mike says, quote, "Then in 1993, a warrant was issued for my arrest for a 1,896 plant grow in the Midwest. I fled the state, then the country. As a fugitive, I lived on the lam under 7 different fake identities until my arrest in 2001. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, DEA, FBI, and over a dozen other agencies took part in the investigation and subsequent bust. The RCMP, that's the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, estimated that over the previous year, the illicit organization I ran trafficked $50 million worth of PC bud. I lost everything and sat in jail for months." This is, unquote, this is Zoran Zaev's friend and possibly investor in Macedonia. The man's a scumbag.
Yeah, this came just as a government minister who was actually tasked with bringing actual legitimate investments, the kind of which we got used to under Nikola Gruevski, like these large manufacturing
factories,
companies,
yeah, right,
hiring hundreds of people, thousands at times. And she was asked, "Hey, can you tell us how many factories have you opened?" "Well, about 30. "Can you name any of them?" And she makes the funniest face imaginable, like completely stumped. Then she's recorded complaining to the journalist, "It was not fair to ask me this kind of question." So they got nothing on the actual proper blue-collar manufacturing front, but they have this type of people coming here. Obviously, he was not meeting Zaev in Zaev's capacity as prime minister, but in Zaev's capacity of a businessman whose family is actually investing in the same marijuana business, which is so thoroughly regulated, so you cannot open a competing marijuana plantation or whatever in the country without the approval of the government. So Zaev is doing business in a highly regulated environment, which guarantees that he will be the only one who can access, I don't know, the resources needed, the land he needs, or get a permit to produce the stuff. And then the other issue here is that, how much money can you actually make out of cannabis oil, which is allegedly the only thing we're growing? I'm pretty sure, given the experience with neighboring Albania, and I was just checking, Alexander Soros was meeting Edi Rama in Albania before he flew to Skopje. This will definitely lead to, if the market is much more lucrative in selling marijuana for smoking instead of just using it as cannabis oil, I'm pretty sure this is going to, at the very least, is going to lead to this vaping of marijuana-infused joints, like vaping devices. At the very least. And very likely it's going to lead to actual smuggling of marijuana for use in Europe. So this is the type of businesses we're now dealing with. On one end, heavily regulated, which is crime by itself. Zaev is obviously abusing his position as prime minister to advance his family business. And on the other, it will definitely lead to smuggling.
Wow. Well, this is, and I'm going to put out an article, I think, on Tuesday about Big Mike and his life and everything else, because I really want. I'm not going to take any position in this article or in this podcast on the issue of cannabis oil. I've seen various studies and read various things about that. It can be helpful and whatnot. I don't know. I simply don't know. I haven't read enough or done enough. But I think the point is this man, Mike, whatever his last name is, Big Mike Don, is a man of low character. And the fact that Zaev met with him but didn't want to say anything, he knew that what we're talking about would get out. And that's not the kind of person or company that you want investing or even being in Macedonia. I think there's a joke in here somewhere. Matthew Palmer, Alexander Soros, and Big Mike go into Zoran Zaev's office. Ta-da, ta-da. Okay. Yeah, so...
What a crew, what a bunch of lowlifes.
Exactly.
And Alexander was here, curiously, exactly at the time when we had a spike in migrants coming into Greece. Was it hundreds? I think like in high hundreds, flooding the Lesbos, the island of Lesbos, which the islands are already overcrowded. And we know that this was Soros's big thing. The Soros leaks showed that he was getting daily reports on the flows of migrants in and out of Macedonia in 2015 and 2016. So now we have deja vu all over again. The Italian government is being brought down by the same means used to bring down the Berlusconi government. It seems that, we see a livening up of the migrant situation. And the Greek government, even though this is now a conservative government and it said it's going to protect the borders, yada, 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 their first decision was that the situation in the islands is untenable, and they want to bring 10,000 migrants from the islands into the northern part of Greece, into southern Macedonia or Aegean Macedonia. And obviously this is the worst thing you can do if you want to keep the route closed, because as soon as they're on dry land, on the mainland, they're going to make a beeline for the border. And once, migrants waiting in Turkey, in Syria, realize what's happening, they're going to say, okay, great. They're reactivating the ferries taking us from Lesbos, Kos, these large islands, back to Piraeus, to Athens, and then we'll take it from there. So it's cruel, but the best way to keep the route closed is to keep the people in Lesbos and wait for news that conditions are poor, and more importantly that there is no getting anywhere from Lesbos further toward Greece, toward Germany, that you're stuck on the island, and this discourages new people from coming onto the island. Once you start moving them from the island onto the mainland, a new batch is going to come. Likely more than the 10,000 they want to move from the islands onto the mainland. So, yeah, we might have some new developments on this front soon.
That is something that we need to continue to monitor. Well, let's see. I mentioned in the opening monologue there, Independence Day is next Sunday, September 8th. Macedonia's 28th birthday. 28th birthday, yeah. This is going to be interesting. This will be the first Independence Day since the quote-unquote so-called Prespa Agreement is in effect. I see that Nikola Dimitrov met with the new Greek Foreign Minister Nikos Dendias, I believe is how you pronounce his last name, and the Greek Foreign Minister said, I made it absolutely clear to Mr. Dimitrov that Greece will insist on the agreement's strict implementation. And so one of those things, the strict implementation, of course, is the removal, as we talked about last week and in the past, in episode number 1 of the Macedonian Star of Kutlesh from all the public, literally from the public square. We use the phrase the public square, in when we talk about civic engagement and the ability to talk, in the public sphere, but we use the public square. But it's being removed, and then I saw, and so this, I think we talked about it last week, will lead to a backlash. It is leading to a backlash. It'll continue to be a backlash. People will be using it more and more in all kinds of public spaces. I saw that some guerrilla group, there's a little, in Gradski Park in Skopje, city park, there's this band, lack of a better word, is this white band shell, where little performances are done, and some group painted the flag on the back of it. Am I remembering that correctly? I think I saw an article on it.
Yeah, it's like a concrete, like a miniature podium for concerts. For some reason, it's considered an iconic place in the park for lack of more iconic things to see there. We call it Školka, the clan.
Okay. And somebody...
initially it was painted with like artsy graffiti and stuff. And then somebody in town hall had the smart idea of painting it white. Mm-hmm. And then obviously a group working on Facebook painted the flag. Initially, I'm not sure about the first picture, if it's legit, but then it was repainted apparently to cover up the Star of Kutlesh, which these guys painted on it, and then they painted a smaller version. And now, like in those jokes, you've seen those when somebody paints a penis on a facade, and then they just paint over the contours of the penis, and it's still showing. So in this case, somebody painted over the flag, and it's but over the contours. They didn't want to waste too much paint, so now you can tell that something was painted there, and somebody's trying to cover it up.
Oh, that is funny. I've actually had my own engaged in my own guerrilla activities when I was a college student in terms of paint in public places. The leftists on campus here at the University of Arizona spray painted on sidewalks and things like that. Basically, a outline of a hand, a human hand, and it said U.S. out of Central America. This is way back when, during Contra and the Sandinistas of Nicaragua, etc. So what we did was we took a stencil and we just added an SR to the U.S. So it said USSR out of Central America. So we weren't actually defacing public property. We were just adding to that. But we were improving it, exactly.
Yeah,
yes.
I've done a bunch of those things.
So this is fantastic. I hope these.
I once painted over the communist star on one of the monuments in Skopje of the defenders, the liberators of Skopje, and it has the communist star. But I think you still can't see it well because I painted it over like 10, 15 years ago. But I guess the paint stuck inside the pores of the stone.
Oh, that's funny. And so then we see the Kumanovo City Council, I believe, put a sticker of the original flag, the Star of Kutlesh, on the backs of their laptops. And then was it the president of the city council that berated them for that? There was a video going around.
Yeah, she's the president of the council. Yeah.
Okay.
The assembly is the president of the council.
Naturally. And what did she say in a nutshell, basically? What did she say about the council members who dared to defy the government?
Oh, it was the VMRO council members who placed the Star of Kutlesh on their laptops, like stickers, and she was very in your face, very authoritarian. She was like from on high. She was citing the clauses of the Prespa Treaty, all the while using Republic of Macedonia instead of Republic of North Macedonia. Under the treaty, she was telling them, you're violating the law, you want to undermine the rules, the regulations of our country, etc. You might imagine her, calling the police on the council members for an act of self-expression and using a symbol. Some on the SDSM, some stupider people on their Twitters are even going further. They're actually calling it a fascist symbol. And they're trying to make it like a symbol of huge nationalism and how the Prespa Treaty has defeated Macedonian nationalism, where in fact it has only encouraged and appeased Greek nationalism in reality. So, it was a very ugly episode. She was the star of Facebook that day. Everybody was sharing the video of her threatening and cajoling and being in the faces of the opposition members of the Kumanova Council and just frankly demeaning her own country. It's really ugly.
Yeah, and the best part of it, Cvetin, what is her first name?
Yeah, the lady's called Athena. Athena. Her given name is a violation of the Prespa Treaty.
That is fantastic.
Horrible, yeah.
Oh
my God.
Well, and I think it's useful. Again, repetition is useful in some aspects because it drives into my mind, your mind, whoever's listening or reading or whatever. We remember things through repetition and through study, and this is that symbol, the Star of Kutlesh. Other people know it as the Star of Regina, is found throughout Macedonia. Mm-hmm. On objects that are dug up in the ground, on cultural artifacts. It's in churches going back, well over 100 years, 150 years or more. It's found in Greece as well. We should mention that as well. But it was not until 1977, 1978, during the excavations in what is present-day Greece, in Vergina, by the Greek archaeologist Manilos Andronikos, that he found that symbol on some golden sarcophagi, which it's still debated whether or not that's the tomb of Philip II or others. I'm not going to get into a debate on that. But the point is, he is the only one who made the assertion that that was therefore a royal symbol of the ancient Macedonian household. But that issue is debated. And so my point is, however, that symbol is found throughout Macedonia, long before Manilos Andronikos found it in Greece. And so, since it is found throughout Macedonia, literally dug up from items in the ground, it belongs to the Macedonian people. The Greeks can use it as well. It belongs to them too. Fine. You cannot ban it, which is what the government of the Republic of Macedonia under Zoran Zaev and Nikola Dimitrov have tried to do. And as I said in the opening monologue, again, when Nikola Dimitrov was the Macedonian ambassador to the United States, in 2002, and this was in response to, I think it was at the time, the state of Illinois trying to pass a resolution at the state level saying that, Macedonia is Greek, blah, blah, blah. And Dimitrov said, and this is in the Chicago Sun-Times, quote, "Matters of history are for historians to answer. They cannot be answered by political resolution or declaration," unquote. And yet today, what he did in signing the so-called Prespa agreement is an absolute violation of what he said 18 years ago. So,
despite my efforts with the spray paint, we haven't banned the communist symbols. We actually had the communist star on our coat of arms until recently. I still have it on my passport, which reminds me I have to renew it before they start issuing those with the Republic of North Macedonia. You can see even, I'm not sure if the swastika is legally, the swastika symbol, if it's legally banned in Macedonia. Mein Kampf is sold freely in bookstores, etc. And we're banning
sold on Amazon.
This symbol. We're banning, imagine. But we're banning the Star of Kutlesh as some kind of a nationalist symbol or something. It was found in Greece. It was found on territory which Greece occupied like barely 100 years ago. And
right.
As you said, it's been found throughout history, buried there millennia ago. So, for Greeks to insist on full exclusivity on the symbol, it's unbelievable. And the fact that Zaev's government signed on to this, it's just, the humiliations are never going to end. As soon as Greece or Bulgaria politically, domestically needs some issue to fight over, they're just going to raise them again and again.
Држите некои предавања тука 20 години државата ве плаќа да паламутите и да мешетарите и да малверзации цело време испорачувате. Имате човек за 8 години засукал ракавите, дава плати.
And welcome back to the Macedonian Content Farmers podcast. This is Cvetin and we have Jason Miko online from Arizona. And last week we didn't have any farmers picks, and this week we're having a joint one. It's actually a well-deserved one. Jason, you want to tell us what it's about?
Yes, it's the Macedonian documentary Honeyland. Will be it's the Macedonia's pick for the Best International Feature category for the 92nd Academy Awards. Apparently it was at Sundance earlier this year, picked up for North American distribution, so it has been making its way around the U.S. I have not seen it. Have you seen it?
No.
Yeah, and again, it's a documentary. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's the story about an elderly lady living in a small Turkish hamlet, like 5 people live there, near Štip, and she's like she's actually not tending, she's looking up and finding these wild beehives around the hills, and she's producing this beyond organic honey. It's extracted from the wild, essentially. It's a completely, we have these Turkish villages across the country in some of the most inaccessible parts, living completely isolated from the rest of the country, and they are actually, she's actually living. She lived with her mother at the time. The mother died after the filming, and like completely 17th century style of living, and it's apparently well told story and very well filmed. With, I think they received, they were given a bunch of awards at Sundance, I believe, for filming, and because it's, you can tell by
cinematography, story,
the lighting, the scenery is really outstanding.
Yes, and I think it took several years to make.
Yeah, that's the strong point.
Yeah. And I just noticed, I'm looking it up, believe it or not, and it's playing at one of the local theaters here in town. In Tucson.
Seriously?
So yes, I've got it. It's at our quote unquote arts theater here in town. So I'm going to go see it this week, and I would encourage all of our listeners, if they have the chance, to go see it. The last Macedonian film I saw was almost a year ago in Toronto at the Macedonian Film Festival, The Secret Ingredient, which was hilarious. But and if you haven't seen that, I would recommend that as well. But yeah, it's a good joint farmers pick for us for this week.
The one thing I don't like about the movie is that all the usual suspects, the diplomats here, they've been overpraising it, and I'm getting this vibe that it's moving in Tamara and Eurovision territory slowly. Hopefully, it's not the case, but they're overpraising it. And using north as they do so.
Right. Well, that's going to be one of their. Well, that is a full wrap. Covered a lot of ground. Next week, I know we'll cover a lot of ground as well. And in the meantime, I hope Macedonia's children begin a excellent week of school for this new school year.
Yeah, we're going to have to keep our eyes open on what they're actually teaching them now under the...
Oh, yes, of course, yes. All right, yeah, okay, right back into it. Yeah, we'll have to monitor... Yeah, the government, of course, is going to be changing all the school books, textbooks, maps, atlases, and teaching guides. So, yeah, all right. Well, never a dull moment.
Yeah, we'll have our hands full getting them to unlearn what they learned at school.
Yeah, that reminds me of another article I'm working on. But anyway, all right. Yeah. Been great talking to you as always, Cvetin.
You too, buddy. Take care and greetings to all the listeners.
All right. We'll see you. Bye.